Thank you very much. This is a joint work with Graciana Damsa, who is not here, so I'm going to talk for both of us. I will talk about focus movement in what is commonly called the VP periphery. So I will try to provide a cartographic analysis of the morphosyntax of some post-verbal focus construction and LAMSO and limbum. And then I will show how those constructions interact with core principles of syntactic analysis, such as relativized minimality and merge in the low VP periphery. More specifically, I will try to investigate on the following constructions. The first one, you have a post-verbal subject followed by a post-verbal subject preceded by a pronoun and a copula, like in LAMSO in B, in A1, 1A, and in 1B, in limbum, what you get is the copula, but you don't have any pronoun. So that is the first strategy to focus the subject, and then the subject is followed by the other arguments. Then I will move on to the next strategy. Here we are focusing the subject, but the order of the direct object and indirect object is reversed. So in this case, for example, you have the direct object preceding the indirect object. In the first case, it was indirect object, direct object, following the subject. So still here, you have a pronoun and a copula in LAMSO, and in limbum, what you have is simply the copula ba. The next strategy has to do with the focusing of the indirect object. So in these two languages, if you want to focus the indirect object post-verbally, that indirect object can be preceded by a copula in limbum, but in LAMSO, it is preceded by a pronoun and a copula. And here we have a case of object focusing, here the indirect object, which seems to occupy the unmarked position, or the canonical position if you want. So in LAMSO you have B offered dimio a house, you have A de love, and in limbum you have forgave Kenny a book, where book is preceded by the copula. And the next strategy is you can focus the direct object preceding the indirect object. So you can invert the order of arguments. And here you have the arguments, the direct object house preceding the indirect object. That strategy is also possible. And the same thing in limbum in 5B. Okay, I will not be talking about other focus strategies in the language, in the two languages. So for example, it is the case that both languages have clef constructions. But what you can see in limbum, in the first language is LAMSO. When you have to focus, you don't have an expletive, but you have a copula. And then, interestingly, when you extract the subject, you need a resumptive pronoun, and you have that morphological change on the verb. So normally in canonical cases, you will not have the on at the end. You will just have the on if you extract the constituent. In limbum, you have the pronoun, but you don't have the the copula. And then the subject here, because it is the subject that is cleft, you have a resumptive pronoun. But there is no morphological change on the verb. As opposed to subject focusing, object focusing doesn't require resumption. So as you can see there, if you focus the direct object, it is be that Buri saw. You have the copula, you have the focus, then the relative marker which agrees a noun class with the focus element. But you don't need a resumptive. So the same thing goes with limbum in B. Okay, actually, this subject-verb asymmetry can be explained along the line of the subject criterion proposed by Luigi and Shlonsky and other works on criterial phrasing. What you can, we can express it informally in 8, where you can extract the subject from the VP to the subject position, but you can't extract it again because of the subject condition, right? Like the subject criterion. If you move the subject there, the subject position is a criterial position, so the subject gets frozen. So the only way you can do that, for example, in Lamso and Limbum, is to resume the subject in such a way that if you have a resumptive which is externally merged in the subject position, you may now move the GP directly up across the resumptive. That is one strategy. But as opposed to the subject, you can see that the object extraction is not constrained, because basically in the literature there is nothing like the object criterion, so object extraction is more flexible. Okay, there is also what is commonly called in the literature in situ focus. But I'm tempted to say that there is actually no in situ focus, but that's another debate. I will not talk about it here. The cases in point, if you have 9 and 10, who did BC, and you have BC chin, this strategy is also possible without any morphological marking. Or in 10, who did for offered the house to, and then you have house in situ, in quotes. So I will not talk about it as well. Okay, Limbum and Lamso are 2 Grassfield Bantu languages spoken in Cameroon. The number of Lamso speakers is estimated around 25,000, and for Limbum, about 130,000. And previous work on focus construction in Limbum include Sala, Fongpu, Mogadam, Biloa, 2020. For Lamso and for Limbum, Graciana Damsa has talked about it and other researchers. The basic word order in both languages is, when you have a double object construction, is SV, indirect object, direct object. So Berry gave B the shoes, or Nkene is giving Nkunko a book. However, it is possible to invert that order. So you can have the order in which the direct object precedes the indirect object, if and only if the direct object is presupposed in the discourse and the indirect object is new information. So in 12, who did Berry give the shoes to? I have underlined shoes because it is the direct object and it is mentioned. The only way you can answer this question is by placing the shoes before the indirect object, which is B. And the same thing goes for 13. You have book, which is mentioned in the question, and then in the answer, that old information should precede the new information. So that's why in a context like 14 or 15, who did Barry give the shoes to? You cannot have new information here preceding the old information. That is inappropriate in this specific context. So the context in which old information precedes the new information is the appropriate one. So we have both cases in 14 and 15. Okay, some other characteristics of these two languages is that there are some few cases of subject agreement morphology. As you can see there, if you have the birds will eat a banana with the subject marker she, it is possible to have a null subject construction like in B, so you can drop the subject. In Lamson, it is the same thing for Limbum, where you have the subject marker up, the goat has entered the house, and if the goat is mentioned in the discourse that it is salient, therefore you can drop it, you can omit it. And as I said, null subjects are not licensed for noun classes that do not have any agreement morphology. So this is the case in most Grassfield Bantu languages, the case of names and kinship terms. In 18, for example, and 19, the A sentences, you have the subject, but you don't have any morphological agreement to encode subject-verb agreement. And as a result, you cannot drop the subject in this specific case. So let's say that pro-drop in these languages is licensed by the subject markers, right? If you have a subject marker, then you can have a null subject. There are some evidence for verb movement in both languages. I'm presenting this because this will be useful for our understanding of the scenario that I will be talking about. In 20A, you have the birds ate the banana. You can see in this specific case, the verb here is to eat, which is G. And you have, can I use the remote? I'm not sure. Okay, anyway, in 20A, you have a verb complex, a verbal complex made up of the subject marker, which is me. We have ki, which is past tense one. You have the verb to eat, and then you have the perfective aspect marker ne. Based on this example, the suggestion is that actually the lexical verb has to move and attach to the aspect. It is the same thing for 20B, where you have a progressive aspect C preceding the verb to eat. So the analysis here, a possible analysis, seems to indicate that the verb here doesn't have to move, because when you have progressive C, you have G, but you have an implicit imperfective aspect marker. So the assumption in this case is that even in cases where we don't really have a morphological aspect realization, the verb may move somehow. Let's say in this case, below the progressive aspect. The same thing goes in 21, where you have to she. Graciana Damsa says this is the she encodes pluractional aspect. So the idea being that the action of sending took place many times. In this case, you can have the pluractionality aspect preceding following the verb. And in this case, we suppose that the verb has raised. And the last case where you have iterative aspect, and as you can see here in Limbum, the future tense is a complex one. When you have this be, that be always precedes any future. So every time, if you have future 2, future 2, 3, you will have the be before that marker. And that you have the verb to eat, which is ye, which is je, and then you have ngir, and you have the final vowel. So the analysis we suggest is that in this case, the verb has to raise up. Okay, here I've used some semantic evidence, not morphological evidence, to show that the verb raises in both languages. In the first case, you have a post-verbal focus particle, for those who are used to this terminology. So only here, when a post-verbal only is placed there, it can have wide scope on the entire verb phrase. So the question is, how is it the case that a focus operator can scope over a preceding item? So we suggest that scope relations here take place before the verb can move. And you have the same thing for only, for the book. B gave Lemuel only a book. Where the only region here you have is that the only thing that B gave to Lemuel is a book. The only pattern is in Limbum is complex, so that's why I decided to choose the also, because only seems to be a functional more than a lexical item. Okay, here you have also that follows the focus, which is you have VP focus, and the idea here is that the verb has to start low and raises over the focus operator. And the last one is very interesting because you have a focus operator here following the focus, which is house. So the assumption here is that if you have a GP, and that GP select an NP, this focus operator can be adjoined to a position where it C commands the head noun, and but the head noun with data raise up to G0. There are also verbal copulars and expletive pronouns in both languages. And this is important because you will understand why. In Lamso, the first sentence, it appears that the child had eaten. The expletive pronoun that should be used here is ki. You cannot use the expletive a. It appears that the child had eaten. And the second case, Lamso, if you remember, we saw this focus strategy earlier. If you want to focus child in the post-verbal position, the pronoun that is qualified here is a and not ki. The same thing goes in 25. Actually, in Limbum, it seems that my friend loves Nkunku. You have to use the A, but you can't use the A, which is rather used when you have a cleft. So you can see the difference. The pronoun that is used in cleft or in focus construction is not the one that is used in other cases. Some copular clauses include the following. In the first case, you have the copula J, which is B. So B and Chin are my friends. Here it is in the present, and here they were not my friend. You see, have the same copula. In limbum, what you have here is ba, which is to be. So you have it in mala will be a father, and here you have mala was my father. So this is, I wanted to show you the distribution of pronoun and copulas because I will talk about it in the analysis. So the different focus strategies to be discussed here. In LAMSA, when you have a post-verbal constituent, that is the context in 28, I heard that Chin and B saw Buri yesterday. If you want to correct it, you have to say something like, no, saw, it is, be, Buri, etc. So here you have a post-verbal subject marked with a pronoun and a copula, and that subject has to precede the other arguments. It is not possible to place this focalized subject at the end of the sentence. This is only possible in cases where you have intransitive constructions. Object focus can also be realized clause internally, where you have did B see Buri and Chin are the party. You can say no, B saw Buri, not Chin. So as opposed to Chin, it wasn't Chin, but it was Buri, right? So as compared to LAMSA, corrective or contrastive post-verbal focus marking in limbum only uses the verbal copula ba before the focus element, and there is no pronoun. And that has been discussed in previous studies on the language. But like in LAMSA, this strategy is used for focused and non-subject focus, subject focus and non-subject focus. So this is an example of post-verbal subject focus. I think that everybody saw for at the party. If you want to correct it, you use a post-verbal subject preceded by the copula ba, right? In object focus, it is possible if you want to say, you contradict, did you buy a car when you got your first payment? You say, no, I bought a house, not a car. And then you have the copula, and then you have the focus. Two ordering are possible for objects in the two languages. The first ordering, if the indirect object is old and the direct object is new, you have the distribution in B. Did B show your mother to Chin? You say no. Oh, sorry, did should be. Did you show? Okay. Did B? No, I showed him, or B showed him to Buri. Buri here is the focus, which is preceded by Chin, which is mentioned in the question under discussion. So you have old information preceding new information, but here in this case, it is new in the discourse, but it is interpreted as contrastive. In limbum, the context in A, I heard that you offered him for a calf for his birthday. If you want to contrast car with house, you will say, no, I offered him a house and not a car. And here you have all the information which is indirect object followed by the direct object, which is contrastive. Now, if you have the indirect object old and the direct object old. Both cases are possible, right? In Lamso, is it true that B showed Bin and Buri his friend? You can say no, he showed him to Chin, not to B. Okay, and here you can see that in this case you can have your, normally the indirect object here is Tin, and the direct object is my friend, or his friend. So you have that old, then both are mentioned in the discourse actually, right? Did you show this dog to Mfo? I show it. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I think, yeah. Did you show this dog to Mfo and Ngala? You can say, no, I showed it to Mfo, not to Ngala, right? And here you have this process with the copula. Interestingly, this focus strategy, not exactly the same, but the use of the copula has been mentioned in the literature by Boschi, who explores some focus marking, this specific focus marking strategy in some varieties of Spanish spoken in Southern America. So, according to Boschi, the strategy you can see in 35 should not be analyzed as pseudo-cleft or as cleft, but these are specific focus construction which contain a focus phrase inside the verb phrase, actually. But it's clear that the formalization of that focus phrase is not really clear. But the suggestion here is that for him, there is a focus phrase headed by this copula inside the verb phrase. In this example you have with the copula era, s, etc., etc. The second and the last focus strategy, before going to the analysis, is that in both languages you can focus the subject without the copula, a post-verbal subject. And as you can see, in these two languages, and as is the case in many African languages, you cannot focus the subject in a canonical SVO position. And that's why C is bad. Who offered Buri a house? Buri. And you have B, followed by Berry and house, okay? But you cannot have the subject at the end, but you have a post-verbal subject. In this case, you can see that it is information focused. In Limbum, you have the same scenario for information, for contrastive focus context now. Lamso contrastive focus. Okay. Lemuel offered Buri a house. This is the case of contrastive focus. You can say no, Berry, and not Lemuel. And you can see that in this case, although the subject is interpreted contrastively, it is not preceded by the copula. Remember what we saw earlier. But you cannot answer this with a pre-verbal subject. So pre-verbal subjects are inappropriately interpreted as focal in these languages. You have the same thing in Limbum, where you have information focus here. Who gave Nkunku a book? You have a post-verbal subject followed by the other arguments. And you have no marking with the copula. This is appropriately interpreted as information focus. And you can't have a pre-verbal subject. In Limbum, you can also have a post-verbal subject without a copula, that is interpreted as a contrastive focus. So I heard that Nkeni gave Nkunku a book. You can contradict that sentence by saying no, Mfor, not Nkeni gave him a book. So you can see the position of the subject just after the verb. And you can't have a preverbal subject. Okay, I will have two research questions. So the first one has to do with the relevance of the criterial approach adopted in current cartographic studies of scope, discourse, semantics with respect to these two focus marking strategy in Grassfields Bantu. And the next question has to do with the interaction between this focus construction and core syntactic configuration computations. I will adopt the following theoretical assumption. The first assumption has to do with Adriana's proposals and the related work that indicate that it is possible to have topic and focus position in the VP periphery, but what is central to this analysis is that we assume that the copulars in this focus construction are grammaticalized focus markers. So Frascarelli, for example, has suggested this on the basis of Somali, which is a Cushitic language spoken in Africa. So we propose that these copulars are grammaticalized focus markers akin to what is attested in languages with left peripheral focus markers like Abo, Biloa, etc., etc. I will suggest that these copulars are merged in the syntax in the position of the focal head, the head of focus P, okay, and attract the focus element in the VP periphery, okay. In addition to focus, the suggestion is that the low IP field in these languages also contains subject and topic position. So you will have subject position in the VP field, topic position, and focus position. And when the subject head is activated, remember that we had a construction with the copula. When that head is activated, we suggest that subject head has a strong V feature in such a way that that V feature triggers it up from the focus position to a low subject position. So we have that movement of the copula. So the presence of a subject position in the clause is constrained by the subject criterion, and which requires a spec-head agreement between the pronoun that we saw in the case of Lamso and the null pronoun in Limbum, as I will show, and the copula. In this analysis, we consider the idea that clause internal topic are not a badness topic. So the topic I will be talking about here has nothing to do with high topics, which actually has to, the high predication, the topic, comment, articulation. No. We will consider topics here simply as information that is also available in the discourse or in the background, and that can be resumed. And that has been proposed in the literature by a number of researchers. Okay, this is the first focus marking strategy. As you can see from the glosses, you have a post-verbal subject preceded by a copula and followed by a direct object. So the sentence, for example, corresponds to, it is B who saw Buri. Okay. The suggestion here is that when you have this and this point, you have to, first of all, extract the subject from the subject position, original merge position, spec VP. You send it to the focus position. And as you can see, the copula which is used here is initially merged in the head of the focus position. And the assumption here is that the subject head has a strong verb feature, because actually these are verbal copulas, that feature attracts the copula up, and that the position of the subject phrase is occupied by a pronoun in lamso, but what the corresponding thing in limbum on your right side is a null pronoun. Okay, so when you extract the subject, you send it to the specifier of the focus phrase. On the left of the focus marker, you have the focus criterion, but because sub0 has a strong feature, it attracts it, and then you can have the EPP feature here satisfy in the local spec verb subject, let's say spec subject and the head of subject. And when you have extracted that, you take Buri, which is all the information in the discourse, you send it to the topic position, and you remain with the lexical verb in such a way that you will now drag the entire VP containing the copies of the extracted material. You send them to the specifier position of the aspect phrase. That's why I decided to show you some evidence of verb movement. But in this case, it's actually a kind of phrasal verb movement, right? It's not a head movement. Because if you may ask why, if we were to suggest a head movement analysis, you will see that you will get a wrong prediction, because the subject, by raising up, will be blocked by the presence of the copula, which is actually in the head position. So the same thing goes for limbum on the right side, where you take the subject for to the spec foc position. You have agreement with the focus marker, which is the copula. Then the copula raises to the subject head, and what you get in limbum is a null pronoun, which corresponds to a pronoun in lamso here. And later on, you take mala, which is already mentioned in the discourse, which I consider a close internal topic. You raise it to the topic, and you remain with the subject. Normally, it should not be spelled out down. You raise it to the specifier position of aspect for aspect latency. And then you get the word order you can see in the glosses above. The second possibility now, you want to focus a post-verbal object with a copula and a pronoun in the case of lamso and a null pronoun in the case of limbum. The first thing you have to do here is you take the object, you send it to the spec of foc, and with head movement of the copula, you remain with the VP containing the lexical subject and the verb, and you send to the specifier of the aspect. So normally this pronoun here should not be spelled out. So it should not be spelled out, okay? The prediction here is that actually, because the subject position is already occupied there by the pronoun, if we were to raise the subject out of the VP, it will be blocked there by that subject position. So the only way we can solve that problem here is by smuggling the VP containing the subject, sending it to the aspect position, and now extracting the subject and sending it to the head, to the specifier of TP. And it's actually the same thing for limbum here. The only difference being that you don't have a pronoun spelled out in spec subject phrase. Okay, the next strategy is you have double object construction where the indirect object is given and the direct object is focused. In this case, the indirect object here is B. You take B, you send it to the topic position, then you take the house, you send it to the focus position with the same head movement of the copula going up, and now you remain with the verb phrase with the lexical verb that you send up to the aspect position. When you send it here, you can now extract the subject and send it up to the subject position. It's actually the same. If you see lamso, you see limum. The difference is that you have a pronoun, a null pronoun there, but here you have a pronoun which is an expletive. The next distribution has to do with you have a contrastive focus preceding an indirect object, which is given, for example. So here we propose that the indirect object here, which is a preposition, let's say the prepositional phrase, B raises to a low topic position. Then the direct object raises to the focus position. When you do that, you remain with the VP containing the subject and the verb. You take that remnant, you smuggle the remnant, you send to the specifier of aspect, then you sub-extract the subject from spec VP and you send it up. Then you get the derivation. I use the lamso case. Actually, the same thing goes for limbum. And the next strategy, here you have a direct object which precedes an indirect object which is interpreted as contrastive focus, okay? The same thing goes here where you have to extract, you have a kind of VP evacuation, you evacuate the direct object, you send it to the topic because it is given information, then you take the indirect object, you send it to the focus position. You remain with the verb phrase containing the subject and the lexical verb. You send them up, and then you can now take the subject and send it to the subject position. And then you can get the sentence above. And I think this should be the last one. Yes. Okay, the last strategy to highlight post-verbal focusing without the copula and the pronoun. We saw that this strategy can be interpreted as new information or as contrastive focus depending on the context. In this case, I choose this because I intentionally choose this because of the double object construction, because you can have that alternation in the placement. But the idea here is that you have to evacuate the VP by sending the indirect object to the topic position, which is mala. You send it up. Then you take the book, which is the direct object. You send it to the another topic position. Let's say the two objects are given in the discourse. Then you remain with the verb phrase that you pipe, you send it to the aspect position. And then the subject position high there will be occupied by the pro, but which actually form a kind of representational chain with the subject in the focus position. I think that's all. So we analyzed two different focus strategies in LAMSO and Limbum, and we saw that any post-verbal constituent, object or subject, that is preceded by a verbal copula and an expletive, which can be spelled out or not, is always interpreted correctively or contrastively, if you want. Post-verbal subjects without any copula can be interpreted either as new information or as contrastive information. In the two cases analyzed, we saw that focus movement always targets a focus position in the low IP field and interacts with topic and smuggling, this smuggling of the VP, and that the verbal copulas, as we use in the first strategy, function as grammaticalized focus markers that is similar to what is attested in languages with left peripheral focus markers. So we saw that the pronoun that associate with the copula in the first strategy do not convey aboutness interpretation. So the low subject position we saw, the only role here is that it functions in the syntax in order to satisfy the subject condition in the low subject position. And that the presence of expletive and copulas in low focalization lead us not only to postulate that there exist focus and topic positions, but also the subject position in the clause. And then the Grassfield Bantu languages that we just examined support the following. First, we have to reconsider the VP phase in line with Adriana Belletti original work and subsequent work, and that the existence of distinct subject position in the clause in line with Shlonsky, cardinality, and the rest, although the subject they are talking about here are very different from the subject here because their subject position is really high, but my subject position here is low, so it's in the VP periphery. So I think under close examination, the position of the object in the clausal spine in this construction can be well accounted if we adopt a smuggling-based approach as proposed by Collins and Adriana Belletti and Collins, a strategy which helps us to avoid minimality effects in cases where relativized minimality seems to be challenged. So the resulting construction obtained provide us with clear maps of various syntactic configurations that do justice to the cartographic approach. Thank you very much.